One question that rarely gets asked out loud, I think, when we talk about impact in the future is why do we want to increase our impact? And there's probably as many different reasons as there are people here, but you know, is it that we believe so strongly in what we do that we think everybody ought to believe the same way? Or are we trying to create more opportunities for ourselves? And I think some of those, as absurd as they sound, are actually, you know, natural human motivations, and they're there. But the reason why is important is because it would help inform us about how to go about increasing our impact. So I think if we understand that question, and I don't have answers to that, I just wanted to start with the why. And I think, too, as much as I dearly love, and so many of us love electroacoustic music and acousmatic in particular, and this is why we come to this conference, we need to think about expanding. If we're going to increase our impact, we need to promote a whole field that may be larger and include musics that we don't necessarily practice ourselves. And I think and most of the people that I've heard talk, and Lee in particular, does talk about a very wide swath of types of music, but just to underline that point. And I think there's two areas of musical activity that we don't talk about much in this particular conference, two threads of development. One is interactivity, and the other is mobility. And I think those are important trends for the future. And I'm going to talk more about impact than future today, but just those two things are important to think about. Partly because they influence the next thing I'd like to mention, and that's how do we evaluate impact? I'm lucky enough to be sitting on the committee right now, since I'll be up for tenure in a couple of years. Being on the committee that decides how faculty are evaluated has certain advantages. But we're looking, I'm in a communications and new media program. And we have such a different challenge for people who are practicing in this field than people who have been in traditional fields where the status of the research journals, whether it's a single authorship or multiple authorship, and some of these sort of old world ways of evaluating that everybody knows works for certain fields. And then, of course, there's a different way of evaluating in the conservatories, how you evaluate the impact of music. But then there's this new media thing, and I think we're all very much involved and need to be aware of this issue too. How can we get our deans and our, I mean, assuming that we're in academia, I don't mean that everybody is influenced by this, but I think it's important to establishing and growing within the academic community, and then therefore spreading through teaching, the impact of electroacoustic music. How do we evaluate the impact of media when we're publishing in ways that people haven't published before? And John Ippolito wrote a great article in Leonardo a couple of years ago. It's a manifesto that had been evolving and been published several times before, but talks about things like, well, hits on a website, the number of times you're mentioned in a blog, whether or not you're organizing a web presence. So, you know, in this way, Lee would score very highly for the Years Project, but it's not a typical kind of publication, and our deans don't know how to evaluate that sort of thing. So we need to lay out what our own criteria for success is, so that other people can then measure us on those criteria. And it's different from other fields. I'd like to bring up something that's, I know it's controversial, and I was hoping Daniel was going to be in the crowd here when I said that, but I think tools are important. And I know I hope, or probably I imagine that you're all thinking, uh-oh, here we go, technological stuff. But I think in one sense tools are not important. Composers compose. That's it. But from another perspective, especially the sociological, I think that tools make a big difference. And the perspective this perspective that I'm taking is more like a human-computer interface designer. If you don't get it right, it doesn't matter how good it is underneath, people aren't going to use it. So if we're talking about access to the masses, What we need to do as tool builders, and I'm sure there are a couple people in here that wear that hat at least some of the time, and I wear it a fair amount of the time myself. We need to really think about the way people work, their workflow, and I don't just mean composers, but I mean people who are developing web pages, and there are, you know, many hundreds of thousands of them, or writing casual games. If those people right now are triggering wave files for it's just not interactive sound, it's not interesting. We can provide better tools for them and enrich the online experience for everybody. And I think that that's important. We have a vision and we have our own tools for working, but this isn't true of people in general. There's another perspective on the tools thing. Until we all have the choice of whether to synthesize or record, and that's just a matter of taste and not a matter of practicality, we don't have all the tools that we need yet. Okay, that's the way I feel about it. And I think that there's a lot of work to do in the synthesis domain, a lot of fun and interesting work that will help bring access to a wider group of people. Right, and also another way to think about the lack of tools is we don't have, if we're thinking about mobility and interactivity, and that music can be integrated into the way we move and live. There's a guy named Nick help me out, Australians, Mariette, UNSW in Australia. He just did his dissertation on, it's a personal, mobile, location-aware audio system. So it's just meant that it looks like headphones, or it will when everything's small enough. But it means I can walk around and sounds can be tied to, for example, specific objects. And as I move by those objects, the sound stays with those objects, even though it's synthetically generated. Nobody else can hear the sound but me. If I turn my head, the world stays the same, this sort of thing. There is a lot of development to do in those areas. So I think if we think of interactivity and mobility as being a big part of music in the future, then one way to think about that is tool development is going to be able to contribute to that. Okay, enough about tools. I'm representing Asia today. I live in Singapore and work in Singapore, and where I've been for 15 years. And I would like to mention Ho Chung-Shi. I'm plugging him again because I think he's a real gem that Singapore has. Singapore is a city of 5 million people, and we're very lucky to have somebody that does such beautiful work as Ho Chung-Shi. They've started something called the Magnetic Band. They work with youth and introduce them to new music, and I think impact in Asia really does depend on a confluence of Eastern traditions with Western music and innovations that have happened over the last 50 years. And that's exactly what they're up to. And they're working with young people who are taking to it beautifully. Right now they're preparing a performance for later in the fall. They're doing a series of workshops first with young people. They're bringing in professors from the universities, the high schools, and even engineers from a local company that does visualizations for their living as a commercial product. And they're all working together right now. They're working on an Earl Brown piece, December 1952, which allows any instruments and is a graphic score, and people go home and work on it and come in and talk about it. So reaching and there's Gucheng players, Sheng players, Guqin, I'm sorry, and mixed in with the electronics. And so I think that's really where the future has to be in Asia. Right now we're stuck in a little bit of the same mode that Raul was mentioning, where we look to the West and think of them as the model, and we want to be there too before we start thinking about anything else and moving ahead. And even when we think about moving ahead, we think about maybe the dream of surpassing the West, instead of just saying, well, what is our identity? What resources do we have? What do the people have to offer right here and right now? And I wish that people around me where I live would take that more to heart, because there is such a richness there, really. It's just not being tapped and brought into electroacoustic music practices. Are you there? Ah, yes, I'm just about there, I think. Yeah, I can wrap it up there. I've hit my points. Good.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you ever